Welcome to the Customer Excellence Podcast. I am your host, Jack Malacco. Today, I am joined by Mr. Andrew McNeile. Am I pronouncing that right?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Great to hear. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. Andrew is the Chief Customer Officer over at ThinScale, a wonderful company over in Dublin, Ireland. He is talking to me from the afternoon. It's morning time here in Texas, but we shouldn't let that be an issue today. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us.
Not at all, Jack. Pleasure to be with you.
Andrew, I've been looking over your resume as I do with all of our guests, and you have got quite the background in everything from Dell computers all the way up till ThinScale now. I am impressed. And on top of that, you are an Oxford graduate. So I like to keep the trend going of talking to people who are much, much smarter than me. And this is definitely the case with today's episode. So, Andrew, we have about 15 or so questions that we're going to talk about today, ranging all the way back from your beginnings in the customer support industry all the way up until today. So without further ado, are you ready to jump into some questions?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's get going. First thing I want to ask you, Andrew, I want to know what your background is. How did you get started in customer support?
So one of my first roles, I don't know if you'll look back quite that far, Jack, onto my CV, was with a computer company that nobody has ever heard of that was selling, actually, would you believe it, Texas Instruments DS10s, which were a sort of mini computer system that TI were shipping. And I'd started my sales career on the princely sum of $150 a week, making sales calls for salespeople to make them appointments. And that was my early training in sales. And one of the things that happened was a colleague I was making calls for, he had sold a system to a company called Great Eastern Trading in the East End of London. And this guy rang up and he was absolutely appalled at the fact that this system was no longer working and was giving out yards to this salesperson, who promptly replied to him, "Mr. Joseph, that is absolutely appalling. I must come and see you immediately." And so we traveled down to the East End of London together, and this guy sat in front of him and sort of talked about his business. We brought a software technician who was looking at the computer, and the guy told him that his business has expanded, that he'd got more stock lines, and the software technician came back and said, "Yeah, of course, they've overrun their disk space." And so Patrick said, "Oh, well, that's fantastic. You know, you've grown your business like this. So actually what's happened is it's just a virtue of your success, and that's why the computer has stopped. And so what you need to do is you need to buy extra disk space, which will cost you another $40,000. And we walked out of the place with an order form and a check and a working system. And so one of the things that I learned, the first thing that I learned about customer service was you move towards the pain and move towards the difficulty.
Okay. Huh. Why do you think that is?
Well, quite often when somebody's hurting, they want you to be there and be available, and their greatest fear is that you're going to hide. And the second thing is usually there is something that you can do which might well involve supplying additional services and support, which will usually result in revenue coming to you, the customer spending money, and being more happy.
Absolutely. Well, that makes sense. So you began there in that East End of London. Yeah. What happened next? How did you get to where you are today?
So, the next piece that I did, so I spent 5 years at that company, learned how to sell, then went into selling market research to the big tech companies. So that was the likes of Compaq and DEC and IBM. So learned quite a bit about sales and sales management and doing that internationally, and decided I didn't want to do any more travel because I'd been doing a lot of it. And so I then went and joined Dell in Bracknell, who were just a very small PC company at that stage. And we were 140 employees in the UK, and that was it in Europe. And it was just changed its name from PCs Limited to Dell. And so I joined that company, ran the indirect sales business. Then we had to go and sort out some issues in Germany. So I was in Germany for a year. And then I took over the operation in Ireland, where we'd set up a call center, which was all the UK small business and consumer sales piece. And that was a $90 million operation, and it grew to about $1 billion over a 5-year period.
Holy cow. So no small feat.
We went from about 30 salespeople to about 250 in that period.
Wow. That must have been an interesting 5 years.
It was because, and it was transformative for the country, because at the time, we didn't have, when I first joined Dell, we didn't have brick in Ireland, nothing. By the end of that 5-year stint, we were the second largest exporter out of the country, shipping $6 billion worth of computers out of the country every year.
Wow. That is incredible. So you did that time at Dell. Yeah.
That was an amazing time.
And now how about let's talk about today at ThinScale. What's going on there?
So, well, that's been an interesting journey too, because I joined the company 2 years ago, and we were focusing at that stage very much on the desktop virtualization, transforming fat PCs into thin clients for companies who were sort of starting on the VDI space and didn't want to commit all of their resources to it. But we'd already developed with a couple of BPOs who running work at home programs, a switchable component that allowed them to secure the technology for their agents for BYOD devices. And as we got into sort of January 2020, I had decided that was really probably the most promising aspect of our business. So I had focused us around selling that component to BPOs and focusing on BPOs, and going and trying to persuade BPOs that actually what we should do, what they should be doing, is driving work at home programs, because it was going to be better. It was going to be more efficient. Agents didn't want to do commutes. They were going to prefer to work at home. It was going to save them a bunch of money. And they were all going, no. I prefer to have them in contact centers. I can control it. I can lock down the technology. I've got it all under control. I can see what's happening. The teams work better. And then came along and changed everybody's mind.
Well, that sort of just happened to work out, right?
Exactly.
In a strange kind of ironic way, I guess, or coincidence, right?
Indeed.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Andrew, at ThinScale, I have to ask, what makes you customer focused?
Very good. And it's funny, having seen two companies up close, I had seen one key distinction between the two of them, and that is the percentage of the time that the C-suite, spend with their customer base. So, in my view, what makes a company customer focused is having a look at how the CEO, how the CTO, what percentage of their time are they spending with customers? Because if they're engaged, what happens then, and let's take an example inside ThinScale, that our CTO is from time to time on support calls. From time to time, he's on demo calls with customers. And another big chunk of his time, he runs the development piece of it. What that has meant is he understands what the customers are looking for, because he's hearing it. He's hearing it in support. He's hearing it in the customer. So I have never had any debate around what product we need to develop. He's already there. In the previous company I've been in, we had long, convoluted debates around what we should be developing. Precisely because a lot of the senior suite weren't really that close to the customer. So you, as the customer-facing executive, kept on having to be banging on the front of the door saying, come on, guys, this is what they're asking for. So that's the difference, because it means you're really in tune. And our CEO, for example, spends a lot of time on the contractual stuff with customers, which means, again, you don't have to then be going, look, really, we do have to cave in on this point, or we do have to, because actually it is, I kind of get, so you're not having to persuade them because he sees it, because he gets it firsthand.
That's amazing. That's so interesting to see as we move into this more work from home situation, all these C-suite roles, acting as sort of boots on the ground with the customers. It's almost.
I think it doesn't have to be totally. That doesn't mean that but it's, neither our CEO nor CTO are suddenly becoming frontline operators.
Oh, sure.
But there's a chunk of their time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting, and a colleague of mine who I know from Dell's times, who's the senior vice president in charge of their international operations, which is a sort of 40 billion piece of it. Part of his advice to one of the small companies that I was with was, to the C-suite level, was spend more time with the customers.
That makes sense. Like you said, you see what they actually need versus just assuming or going off of what you think you're hearing, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting. It's good to see that a company like ThinScale is doing that. So, Andrew, I want to move on to the next question. This one's a little bit of a thinker, right? So oftentimes we make decisions in our careers and they don't necessarily work out the way that we expected them to. So over the course of, say, your career or even just in your role at ThinScale, what decision have you made that's, led to an unexpected outcome, we'll say?
I think, and there's probably negative examples of this, but the one that occurred to me was actually a more positive example. When I was running the sales force in Dell, what happened was we took a whole bunch of young folks straight out of university. So I'd have, let's say, 3 teams of 10 people running these, doing the sales roles. And then I'd create another team. And so I would pick one of these guys from the sales team and put them in charge of this particular team. And what I discovered was that was a very hard transition, because it was like from one day to the next. On Friday night, he was going down with all his mates, going down the pub, having several pints of beer, being a little bit, better, worse for wear. And then he'd come in on Monday morning and suddenly he's the team leader and he's saying, come on, lads, you've got to be at your desk at 9. And the guys are going, who the hell are you? So what I decided to do was to make that transition easier. I created the role of assistant team leader. So I knocked down their quota a little bit so they weren't carrying quite as much quota. And I would take them off the queue and I would train them in a whole bunch of team leader kind of roles, what it meant to be a team leader. It also meant that there were clear people in charge if I took the main team leaders off the queue. So it created a sense of discipline and responsibility. It also created a clear sense of funnel as to who was potentially coming up the curve in terms of leadership, and it created an extra career path. But what was unexpected was there came a point in our growth where we suddenly went from massive acceleration, and I had to go from 5 teams to 10 teams. And I had to recruit 50 people and put them into the whole system. Now, had I not had those assistant team leaders that I could make immediately team leaders, we would never have been able to do it. So it was a weird thing that a thing I'd done to smooth the transition into leadership actually became a pivotal component of growth. And then what I did was I cut the teams all in half so that every team had 4 or 5 experienced people. And then the 4 or 5 people that, 50 people that we hired, we spread them. So everybody had a team leader, 5 experienced people, and 5 new people in each team.
Andrew, that is fantastic. I know the transition from, as you said, someone who's brand new to this world into a leadership role. That's something I've got to keep in the back of my mind, because that is an amazing technique to be able to sort of ease them into that role and give them a chance to prove themselves. Huh.
Well, and they also benefited because as soon as you took them off and started training them, they were then also able to go back to the queue and start to put some of the components into practice and start learning and reading before they got into the role.
Yeah.
Whereas most people move from frontline to management, which is a completely different role.
Oh, yeah.
And without any kind of preparation or training or experience or understanding or thinking.
Do you remember how long you would give them in that period as an assistant before they would become eventually the team lead?
That varied rapidly because sometimes we were just moving so fast.
Right.
I think never less than 3 months,
Okay.
really more than a year,
Okay.
somewhere in that zone.
So it wasn't this prolonged period of years and years where they had to be an assistant and work their way into the team lead. It was essentially that buffer period, right? Get themselves acclimated with that team lead. That's interesting. And it kind of leads into my next question, and that's how you handle bad situations. What do you do when you're stuck in a bad situation, right? So there was the example there of the easing people into the team lead.
Yeah. I think, though, when you asked that question, I was thinking more of, when something's gone really wrong from a customer's point of view, when you really are quite clearly the problem, you're at fault. And the question for me is, what are you going to do in the midst of all of that? And I think listen carefully so that you understand it. Don't get panicked by the emotion. Be available. Don't hide. So don't shy away from the problem. Tell the truth. This is exactly where we are at. Say sorry and try and fix it. And be clear about what the fixed plan is and how long it's going to take you to get there, and don't lie.
It's about owning up to what you do.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. So that can go across any industry, really. I mean, that's not necessarily specific to customer support. But what, in your opinion, are the most challenging parts of working in customer support?
Well, I think actually a countryman of yours has a wonderful phrase, and that is one of my favorite characters is Abraham Lincoln, who says, you can please some of the people all of the time, and all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all of the time. But I think probably the most challenging, so in other words, there are always going to be some people, it doesn't matter what you do for them, they have the capacity to find a problem for every solution that you have. And so that's one of the difficulties in customer service. But I think the most difficult piece is when something goes radically wrong. So the bit that jumped into my mind, for example, was product delays or shortages when we were shipping products and people were expecting the PC to arrive in 3 or 4 weeks, and you suddenly had to tell them, no, it was going to be 3 months or whatever. So that kind of delay, which then would result in huge pileups in the call queues and enormous frustration for people who are trying to get other things solved. And so you were managing communication with customers, communication on support queues, discussions with the factory. So you were dealing with huge numbers of different issues.
Oh, sure. But what lessons, have you learned from those types of challenges?
I think, and this was the one piece I wanted to get across today, because I think in the midst of going down the road towards customer experience, people have introduced technology and thinking that they've improved the experience for the person at the other end. And so one of the things we used to do is we used to hold a customer advocate meeting. And how that worked was there was a gang of us as managers who would come into a room and would dial into every line, every support line, every tech line, every customer line to see what the experience was like coming in for the customer. Now, what happened then was quite often very senior managers would be visiting the place and they would come in and sit in on this meeting. So now you've got a cast of about 14 people. And of course, as soon as senior VP comes in, 3 or 4 others, they arrive in packs.
Right. There's an entourage.
There's an entourage, exactly. But what happened then? So now you're calling the customer support line. You go, And we say to the customers, you've only got a 45-second wait. You call. And now in front of everybody, you've got suddenly a 3-minute wait. Now it's a 4-minute wait. Now it's a 5-minute wait. And now the person who's running customer support is sweating bullets. But what happens is it drives change because it makes it visible. Whereas, and I've sort of come across things recently where people are saying, how many times have I gone into an IVR system and they'll say, why don't you go to our website? And you go, do you think I'd really be calling you if I could have solved this without talking to you?
Exactly.
I saw one trick. Trust me, I'm only calling as an absolute last resort. I want to be making this call even less than you want to resource answering it.
Yeah.
So this is a LinkedIn influencer. And I think that, but if you had a meeting like that where you're calling into these places, or for example, the bank said to me recently on my app, there's been unusual activity, please call us at this number. Okay. Sure. So I call the number. I'm just at the front of the IVR queue. I'm going, you started this. Exactly. What are you making me run through 6 systems?
Exactly. It can be the worst thing in the world.
But if you imagine, the senior vice president of the banking operation now having to go through that in front of
everyone,
20 other, that thing would get fixed like today.
Oh, yeah. It's like you were saying earlier, you have to, 1, own up to the problem and admit something's wrong. But 2, having the C-suite, in this case, be a part of the customer's journey, literally, that changes things, right? Because when they see
visibility. Visibility is the key. And people do it with sort of little dots and things here, but it's not giving clear visibility. And that was the other thing. So when I was running the call center in Dell, I could see the wait time was right across the entire floor. So anybody in the floor could see what the queue was. And as soon as I could see it climbing up, I'd walk out of my office. And they'd all know I was coming out because the queue was up. So they'd be going, here, come on, guys, come back here, come back here.
Time to shape up really fast.
Yeah.
I love that. Nothing compares to the real thing, right?
Yeah.
Being right there in the action.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That is amazing. I feel like more companies should do that, especially cable companies here in America.
Yeah. Well, we all have, and this is the tragic thing, we've got all this technology that can improve it. I've had one experience this morning with my internet, and they solved it on WhatsApp.
Really?
And I thought, well done, guys.
That's perfect. I would love to do something like that. The phone call, that's the worst part.
No, they never even talked to me. They did the whole thing. They got me, and it was a real person.
Yep.
Managing multiple threads.
Sure.
Only keeping me 5 minutes at a time.
Yep.
Telling me what they were doing, telling me what to do, and I got my thing rebooted and up and running again. The
lowest lift for the customer is usually the best case scenario, right? The less you have to do on your end, the better. I love it. We need to keep that one in the back of our mind as customer support people in any role. Andrew, let's take a different page though. Let's look at something else. Who along your career has helped you? Was it your team, your mentor, community, and what resources have you relied on along the way? This could be books or podcasts, anything that's helped you take your support and your leadership to the next level.
I think lots of different things. Always people play a huge role. So, I think back to, I learned an awful lot about sales from that first guy that I worked with. I learned then with the guy who ran the market research firm, was a fabulous guy. I learned a lot from him. At Dell, I think there was all sorts of things that I learned that were really fantastic. The focus on its operational excellence, its attention to detail. It was quite a hard-charging company, but done well, I felt. And I certainly took from that a real engagement with the numbers and the metrics. We very detailed numbers focused company, and how it ran its operations and all the rest of it. I think then alongside that, and individuals in each of those companies, then alongside that, I think books that I've read all the way through the years. So I now have my own book list, which I give out to anybody who wants it, frankly.
We'd love it if you'd share it here.
Okay, I'll share it with you.
You can send it over, and I'll put it in the show notes.
You know, as you can see, some of it will go back to, given the age we're talking about here, somewhat. But I think some of the older ones, still have, even the Dale Carnegies of this world have lots of good stuff. So I think that's been good. I think Gainsight has been wonderful in the whole customer experience world, the customer success world, the Pulse conference that they do. I think they've really, from a very early stage in the development of that company, have facilitated everybody's learning in how to support companies well. So yeah, I think those are some of the influences.
Great. And along the way, Andrew, how have you grown in your role throughout your career?
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I thought again I like telling stories. You see, I think stories are what,
we love stories.
Of what keep people connected. And the biggest learning for me was actually, would you believe it, came from the director of tax in Europe at Dell. I wouldn't have. Yep, we were doing a management development course together in a nice hotel somewhere in the middle of the Gloucestershire. And there were various role plays and so on, and so he watched me at work in a particular thing, and we were then asking each other questions about this particular role play. And he said, Andrew, organize these three things about yourself, not in the way you'd like to be seen, but in the way you think you actually are: results, self, relationship. What order do you think you put on them? And I said to him, results, relationship, self. So results first, relationship second, self third. And I think in many ways, that was probably an encapsulation of where I was at that time in my career. And that I would have, if somebody was not really getting with the picture to get the result, I'd have been very direct and confrontational until we got the result that we needed, because that was what was most important. And I think the biggest learning has been that I had that the wrong way round. And actually, it should be relationship first, results second, self third. Because if you get the relationships right,
sure,
the results will flow. And quite often I would damage relationship with people in seeking to pursue results.
Okay.
And so the growth for me, and sometimes then as a manager, what that can lead you to do is create a culture of fear, not growth.
Absolutely. I know that well. You chase numbers, not
exactly
growth.
Because you're looking at results.
Exactly. You forget that there's people.
Your privacy. But if you look at the people piece, if you look at relationships first, that doesn't mean you don't challenge.
Oh yeah.
Relationship still allows you to go, hang on a minute, that's not quite right.
Right. That's interesting. Relationship, results, self. So you put yourself at the bottom. Think about that last.
It doesn't mean either that doesn't lead you to say, I don't take care of myself, because equally, actually, if you don't take care of yourself, you can't actually manage anything else. You can't manage relationships properly and all the rest of it. But what I think if you allow the self to come to the top, then that's what happens in many companies, where it becomes about the CEO's ego.
Yep. 100%.
So I suppose that's what I'm really trying to say with that, because I've been in plenty of places where it's all about me.
I think we've all known a boss who's like that. That's interesting. That's a good exercise to remember, though. Where would you rank those three? And that was from
the director of tax.
Lessons come from the most interesting places, Andrew. You never know. You never know who's going to teach you something that you'll hang on to for the rest of your life.
Absolutely. Exactly. Huh. And if you'd asked me about him before we went into this session, I would have kind of tax, whatever.
Sure. But it's in remembering that one exercise that it's a lifelong lesson. Huh.
Yep.
So interesting. All right. Andrew, let's move on to the next question. And again, this is another high concept one, if you will, right? What do you, in your opinion, think is going to be the next quote unquote big thing in the customer support world or industry?
Yeah, I struggled a little bit with this one because I think everybody wants to go, this is going to be, RPA or AI or machine learning or blah, blah, blah. None of which, by the way, I think is going to be the next big thing.
Oh, really? Why is that?
No. Well, I mean, I think, actually, we've just done a survey with all of the big, with the sort of senior executives of the BPO industry.
Sure.
And actually, what struck me as I look at that report is technology is not... when you say, okay, so in technology, what is going to be the big thing?
Right,
all of them are kind of going, meh. It's all sort of incidental improvement. Yeah, sure, it's going to be important. It helps. There are these things that are good. I think the one that struck me most was a friend of mine in Google who talked about systems thinking. And what he said was, if somebody rings in with a problem, what he's trying to get them to do is not just fix the problem, but actually fix the piece in the system which created the customer calling in with the problem in the first place.
Fix it at the source.
Exactly. It's sort of fix the system so that these kind of things don't happen.
Right. Don't put a bandage on it. Do the surgery and fix it for good.
But if you're in customer support, the temptation is what you do is you go, oh, you've got a problem. Here's how you fix it. You've got a problem. Here's how you fix it. You've got a problem. Here's how you fix it. So go, actually, hang on a minute. What is it we could do to whatever it is, to the system, to the software, what is it we could do that actually will help this not be a problem?
Well, it takes stress off the customer support team and allows them to focus on bigger things. I like that. It's good.
And he's had to get into it because he had to rapidly reduce the amount of demand upon his system.
Oh, okay. I see.
So he's got 23,000 agents across 5 or 6 different BPOs. But I liked that concept of system thinking that will help really get to the root of it. And then I think the other thing, Jack, is kind of we touched on earlier, is the whole thing of customer journey tracking. Properly understanding what it looks like and feels like for the customer to go through that. And I think the companies that get on top of that will be successful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can see that in a lot of companies right now in the BPO space. It's interesting, though, because this industry, customer support specifically, it can be tricky, right? So with that in mind, Andrew, how do you stay positive in your role? Or how do you keep things fun, if that's even possible, right?
Yep. No, I think the thing that keeps you grounded, or things that keeps me grounded, I would say are family, friends, and faith. I think family, first of all. I think, if one's relationships at home are well and the family is happy, that becomes a good place to restore and refresh and do things together. And you can have fun there. And that can be part of the restorative thing that will keep going when other things are more difficult. And friends likewise. I think sort of the conversations and the communication and the connection with friends is what really can re-energize and help people. And faith, well, I think for everybody this is something slightly different, but for me, that has been a constant source of encouragement, inspiration, optimism, and guidance, which have helped keep me on the straight and narrow when otherwise it would be easy to slip off. But I think then other things like travel, poetry, art, nature, all of those things play a role in refreshing one and giving one new perspective.
Huh. I'll go back to that poetry one. I got to get into that.
Well,
that's
actually
poetry.
That's funny because I did my sales meeting the other day.
Yeah.
I got a poem from Seamus Heaney, who's one of the famous poets here in Ireland. And I actually found a video recording of him reading this poem.
Okay.
And so I decided to start the sales meeting with this. And they're all going, I mean, they all think I'm nuts anyway. But actually, and I was intrigued to see whether they all thought, but several of them said, "Oh, that was lovely," because I was coming into the sales meeting, and it was sort of an opportunity to breathe for a moment in the midst of the day.
Oh yeah, it lightens the mood, and I think poetry is kind of rare in our day-to-day life. So when you incorporate it into business, it's a nice touch. I like that. I might have to start my next meeting with the poem.
If you want to look it up, it was Postscript. Seamus Heaney's Postscript.
Postscript. Okay. We'll have to put that one in the show notes as well. That's good to remember. All right, Andrew, we're moving into the tail ends of our questions. I want to ask you, what is one common customer support myth that you'd like to demystify, if you have any?
Technology solves all customer experience issues.
That seems to be the case. Yeah.
I think that is the myth that is worth demystifying. As somebody put it very, again, I think it was the same lady who I was just saying that, referring to that thing. I think she said, put it like this: omnichannel just means 5 different ways to ignore me. And it's this sort of, you can have all these great technologies, but if you don't manage them, if you don't look after them, if you don't think them through, if they don't coalesce together, or if you say contact us and then you make it almost impossible to find a phone number to actually ring you up, then by the time you're actually connecting with somebody, and then as soon as you get on the IVR, having scraped the website uphill and down dale to find a solution, you get, do you know that many helpful tips can be found on our website?
They go back to the self-service.
Yeah, and it's 3 minutes of the call that I'm trying to get through to you, telling me to go back to the website that I've just come from.
They give you the runaround.
Yeah. I think it's recognizing that this is a tremendous tool that can be used for good and for evil.
It's how you use it, and if it actually works. That's the main point.
I think people get it to work, but they're not allowing themselves to put themselves in the shoes of the customer enough to experience what it really feels like to be the customer at the end of a phone with a problem. Yeah. Technology is brilliant at information. Sure. It can often completely suck when it comes to fixing a problem.
Yep. It's only as good as you make it.
Yeah, exactly.
And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. And it's got to be the lowest lift for the customer to be, a decent experience, like with your internet situation this morning on WhatsApp. No,
I was just going to say, and it was interesting because they did a survey straight afterwards, and precisely because it was such a positive experience, I particularly, A, wanted to take the survey, and B, then gave them a very high rating.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's what it is. I find that people take surveys for only 1 or 2 reasons. They're either really angry or they're really happy and they're surprised with how good it was.
Yeah, exactly.
It's good to keep in mind. All right, Andrew, let's move into our final question. Where or what does customer excellence mean to you?
I think we've covered so many of the different pieces of it, Jack. I think it's all about putting yourself in the shoes of the customer, allowing that customer to feel to see so that you can understand what it feels like for the customer, and providing a good experience. So it's when people have an experience that is above and beyond, like we were talking about with my internet experience today. When you have an experience that is above and beyond what you're expecting, that really constitutes for me when there's an extra level of attention to detail. You go to a hotel and there's a whole bunch of other bits and pieces that they've done which you hadn't expected. It's that above and beyond. And quality of relationship. So I've noticed that with one of my customers, that we've had some difficulties with them, but we've really dug in helping them, and we've always maintained good relationship through it. And now they constantly are telling us, despite them being one of the biggest companies in the world, how we're their best vendor, and we're a tiddlywink by comparison with many of the others. So I think it's those kind of things that make it excellent.
Absolutely. Andrew, that's beautifully put. And I appreciate you so much for coming on to our podcast today and sharing these lessons with us. It's always great to get different perspectives from people that are in different positions, but at the same time, all are customer focused. Is there somewhere where we connect with you online, Andrew? Can we connect via your LinkedIn today?
Yeah, LinkedIn is probably the best place to connect in with me. LinkedIn.com/ian/A.McNeile, or on Twitter @A.McNeile.
Perfect. We'll put those in the show notes so that people can connect and maybe learn from you a little bit more. Thank you again so much for everyone tuning in. If you're watching, thank you for checking this out. If you're listening, thank you for listening. And don't forget, you have the opportunity to check this out in video format on the YouTube channel of SupportNinja. Andrew, thank you again for joining us today. It's been a fantastic conversation.